All right, I think now's a good time just to get started. People probably keep trickling in, but yeah, so welcome everyone. Today we are so excited to have Joseph Brown here to be talking about GRE prep. Joseph is the Graduate Diversity Recruitment Officer for the School of Humanities and Sciences at Stanford, and he knows a lot about this stuff. He also got a PhD from Stanford, which is really awesome. So thanks for being here, Joseph.
Thank you, Sydney. Very good to be with you all today. So, yes, so I'm a PhD alum of the psychology program, and I think I may substantially owe my getting into Stanford psychology program to getting really good scores on the GRE. But that was an atypical experience for me. So, growing up, I tended to not do particularly well on standardized tests like the ACT, the SAT, and the GRE. And so the recommendations I'm going to give you are really built on three experiences. So I have a sort of a varied background. So my undergrad degree is in physics. I first went to grad school in bioengineering, and I studied for the GRE, went in and took it and got mediocre scores. But they were okay enough. I got into Brown's graduate program in bioengineering, so I started that program, hated it, but stayed trying to make it work till finally I left. Years later, decided that I really wanted to understand how stereotypes affected minorities and women in academic settings, and talked to a lot of people and kind of discovered social psychology. When I decided I wanted to get a PhD in psychology, I decided I wanted to get into the best psychology programs in the country. And I knew that my typical performance on standardized exams wasn't going to cut it. I had to do better. And as it happens, the same research that convinced me to go to graduate school in social psychology gave me some really good tips for changing the way that I prepared for high stakes exams like the GRE. And so I studied again, but changed the way that I studied, ended up doing very, very well. So well that I got into all 5 of the psychology PhD programs that I applied to. So uh, some of the recommendations I'm going to make to you are very much the recommendations that I followed. But this talk has also been informed by my expertise in the social psychology of academic achievement and performance, and by my own experience as a test prep instructor. So I used to work for Kaplan my last 2 years in grad school here. And then even when I left to teach psychology at the University of Washington, I taught the LSAT, the GRE, and the GMAT for Kaplan. So those are the 3 sources for this talk. So I'm going to share with you 6 lessons for mindful test prep for the GRE. And let me get you thinking about what I mean when I use that term mindful. So if you haven't taken it down yet, uh, this is the link. You can download all the slides for this workshop, plus a lengthy appendix. And if you haven't had a chance to take that link down, I'll be representing it at the end of the workshop. So I'm going to briefly overview the GRE. Let me go back. I'm not going to spend much time overviewing the GRE because basically, hey, you can get that information anywhere. I'm going to spend most of my time on that second bullet point, and I'm going to end with my recommendations for the key resources that I think you should get if you're going to mount a plan of attack to prepare for the GRE. And there is an appendix which tackles these other topics: how the GRE tends to be used in the grad admissions process, why you shouldn't confuse your performance on the GRE with your preparation for graduate study, because the GRE doesn't capture most of the things that contribute to success in graduate school, and those other questions that the appendix considers. So, by the way, let me address an elephant in the room. If you're working on applying to graduate school this cycle and you've been reviewing program websites, well, we're in the midst of a horrible pandemic that has had its impact on the graduate admissions process, such that many programs have removed the general GRE as a requirement for applying to the program, or they've made it optional. Now, Stanford psychology program is different because last year the psychology department removed the GRE as a requirement for applying to the program, but many other top programs haven't done so. I mention that to say this. I am against the general GRE being used in the graduate application process. I think that it carries way too much weight in that process. But I'm a little worried that people will only apply to programs for which the general GRE is optional or not required. Here's the unfortunate truth. Folks, there are lots of really great psychology programs that unfortunately still require the general GRE. And as long as that's the case, I'm going to continue to do this workshop because I want you to have great recommendations that help you do well on this test so that your GRE scores are an asset to your application, not a detriment to your application, okay? So it's with that in mind that let's get into the general GRE. First, let's talk about the format of this exam. So the general GRE is administered on computer, and you may either take it at a testing site, or now you have the option of taking the general GRE at home on your computer. Now, there are some hoops that you'll have to jump through, but that's one option that's now available to you. And there are 3 scored sections to this exam. When you sit down to take the GRE, the first section is going to be the analytical writing section. And in that section, you'll have to write 2 essays. You'll have 30 minutes to write those essays. In one essay, you'll have to analyze an argument. In another essay, you'll have to take a stand on an issue. You're going to have to mount an argument. Now, these 2 essays are the only piece of the GRE that you won't get a preliminary score on when you finish up the exam. And that's because these essays are going to be electronically transmitted to someone, some human being, who is going to score your essays. And each essay will get a score of between 0 and 6, 6 being the highest score. And so your score on the analytical writing section is going to be an average of your 2 essay scores, right? Folks, this is the newest section of the GRE. And I'm not going to say too much more about these essays, except for 2 things. There's a lot of good advice with Kaplan, Princeton Review, Magoosh on how to prepare for these essays. And so I'll direct you to those resources. But the other thing I want to clue you in on is that some empirical research has been done on these types of essays and how they're scored. And what that research shows is that on average, people who write more get a higher score. Let me say that again. People who write more get a higher score on these essays. And by the way, part of the reason for that is a reality that may be surprising to you. So let me ask you to put it in the chat. So when someone is scoring these essays, I want you to give me a guess as to how long, on average, a grader takes to grade these essays. Put it in the chat. So Young says 1 to 2 minutes. So Rachel says 10 minutes. Kirsten says 10 minutes. Sam says 5 minutes. Darby says 5 minutes. Anne Marie says 5 minutes. Maria says five minutes. Okay, so the prize goes to the very first guess from Young, who said 1 to 2 minutes. That's the right answer. So the graders take on average 1 to 2 minutes to score your essays. Now, folks, there's some implications from that I want you to think about. The first is that when someone is taking that short an amount of time to grade your essays, they're looking for the overall structure of your essay. They're looking for some specific things, and they're reading so quickly that you don't need to worry about minor grammatical errors and spelling errors because they may not even notice those. It's the overall structure of your argument that is going to make the difference. But here's the other thing. When they're reading that fast, surface elements of an argument, surface elements of an essay are going to count more toward your score. And that's why a cue like how much you've written can have an inordinate influence on your score, because they're paying attention to heuristics like how much someone has written. And they're being influenced by the notion that if someone has written a lot, they must have a great deal to say. Now, don't get confused by what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you can write a bunch of junk, right, and get a good score. No. Your essay has to have substance, but you want to err on the side of writing more than writing less. So enough on analytical writing. So there will be 2 scored verbal reasoning sections, 20 questions. You'll have 30 minutes in each section. The quantitative section will be 35 minutes long, 20 questions that you'll have to answer in 35 minutes. And by the way, the second verbal or quantitative section, the average difficulty of that second section will depend on how you did on the first verbal or quantitative section. So what the computer is doing is it's calculating a confidence interval for your score. And if you rock on the first verbal section, you do really well, then that means the computer is going to estimate a higher score for you. And so the average difficulty of the questions in the second verbal section is going to be higher. Folks, that's what you want. For the second verbal or quantitative section, you want the computer to be throwing harder questions at you, because that means that the computer has estimated a higher score for you. So one strategy that comes from that is that you want to pace yourself on the first verbal and quantitative sections and make sure that you do really well on those sections so that the computer calculates a higher estimate for your score and throws harder questions for you. By the way, it doesn't mean you can tank the second verbal or quantitative sections. You want to do well on those second sections. But if you do poorly on those first verbal and quantitative sections, what you have to do with the second sections of the same type is kind of, make up for that poor performance. So better to pace yourself and do really well on those sections. The scoring range for the verbal and quantitative sections is 130 to 170 in 1-point increments, right? With the higher score being a stronger score. Now, beyond that, the format of this test is going to be similar to the pencil and paper standardized exams that you've taken in the past. Inside a section, you can answer the questions in any order that you want. But there are some on-computer utilities that you're going to want to play around with when you prepare for this exam. So when you hit a question that is challenging and you want to tackle it later, you can mark that question and go on to other questions. There's a review screen that you can bring up, and that review screen will show you all the questions for that section. It will show you the questions in that section that you've answered. It will show you questions that you've marked, so you can go directly to those questions and tackle them. It will also show you the questions that you haven't even seen yet. And so part of preparing for this exam is getting used to using those utilities. Also, how do you use scratch paper for this exam, right? So part of preparation is starting to get comfortable with those things. By the way, the question types are going to focus on reading and reasoning rather than vocabulary, but that doesn't mean that vocabulary isn't important. And I'm going to show you a couple of sample questions and hopefully drive that point home for you. Okay? So that's an overview of the GRE. Let's get to mindful test prep. So,
Joseph, can I just jump in with a question real quick?
yes, yeah.
We had someone ask, what is the latest safe date to take the GRE and have the scores in time for the December 1st PhD deadline?
Yeah, so I don't know the answer to that. So I'll direct you to the GRE website. So generally, once you take the GRE, your scores are going to take 3 to 4 weeks to be electronically transmitted to the schools that you selected, right? And so you want to choose a date which will get those scores, before that deadline, whether it's December 1 or whatever those deadlines are. Okay. And by the way, if those scores arrive at those graduate programs, you know, 5 days or a week after the deadline, you may still be okay. But what you might want to do is check with the graduate programs to confirm that. Okay. Now, lesson one for mindful test prep is this. If you're applying to graduate programs this cycle, you're researching those graduate programs. You're reading up on the research of the faculty that interest you. You're reviewing websites. You're looking at how financial support works. You're looking into fellowships that you'll want to be applying to. Well, what you also want to find out is, well, what role does the GRE play in the admissions process for the programs that interest you, right? And what kinds of GRE scores do they like to see in candidates that they deem competitive for their program, right? Like, what are the median GRE scores of the group that they admitted to the program last year? And what were the range of scores? So you don't want to just know, the central tendency, right? The median scores, but you'd like to get a sense of, hey, what were the lowest scores, right? Of someone that they admitted to the program last year, right? By the way, programs are not going to tell you. But if you can talk to grad administrators, if you talk to current students, you may be able to get a rough sense of the scores that you want to aim for to be competitive, right? And the sooner that you find out, the better. Because the sooner that you find out, the sooner that you can start to find out, well, if I were to take the GRE today, how would I do, right? And guess what? You can answer that question without officially taking the GRE, because you can go to the Kaplan website, the Princeton Review website, and you can take one of their diagnostic GREs designed to be similar in format and difficulty to the actual GRE. By the way, the diagnostic exams, the practice exams of a Kaplan or a Princeton Review, in my view, they're a little bit easier than the actual GRE. But no matter, if they're in the ballpark, that's exactly what you want. Now, if you're not satisfied by that, if you want to take an actual GRE, download Power Prep. So Power Prep is ETS's own GRE test prep software compatible with Windows machines or Apple machines. And Power Prep has 2 actual past computer GREs. So if you wanted, you could give yourself one of those GREs and then keep the second one so that it's your last practice exam before you go in and take the actual GRE. By the way, the other thing you can do is just think about your history with standardized exams? Are you someone who, like me, has tended to do mediocre on standardized exams? Or do you tend to do really well? If you tend to do really well, listen, this test is, you're going to find that it's pretty similar to tests you've taken in the past. So maybe you take a practice GRE, a diagnostic GRE, and find that you do really well, that your scores are close to or even higher than the scores you want to have to be competitive. And if that's true, folks, that's good news. You're in better shape than I was either time I was preparing for the GRE, right? And if that's true, okay, take 2 or 3 weeks to familiarize yourself with the format of the GRE, the test questions. Give yourself 1 or 2 more practice GREs to confirm that you're consistently doing well. Go in and take the GRE and wash your hands, knowing that you're done with that part of the graduate application process. And the earlier you do this, the better. So you know it's out of the way, right? So it's August now. For those of you who are applying to grad programs this cycle, what I would want you to do is to take the diagnostic GRE and study and prepare and take the GRE before the fall begins, or get the GRE out of the way early on in the fall quarter or semester, so that once it's done, you've got the rest of the quarter semester to work on the other elements, the other components of the graduate application process. So hopefully that makes sense to folks. Excuse me. Let's stop, and I'm happy to take some questions. Excuse me. And you can use a chat or a function or the Q&A function. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'm going to go on. So I said that this is all about mindful test prep. Put in the chat, what in the world do I mean by mindful? So give me your best guesses, put it in the chat. Okay, so Lauren says, being intentional with your studying. Yes, absolutely. Hannah says, using time wisely. Oh, absolutely. Stacia says, targeting our problem areas. Absolutely. So Maria says, having a purpose to studying. And Gurmeher, please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, says strategic and planned. Amit says coolness. Darby says purposeful. Yes, yes. So hey, those are all right in the ballpark. So y'all, good for you. So here's what I'm, so there are a couple of Q&As. So hold on. So let me tackle these. So Ashley asks, if the schools we're applying to do not require the GRE, is there any reason to take them? So Ashley, I say, if you have solidified your list of the programs you're applying to and none of them require the GRE, well, there are 2 things I want to say. First, if some of those programs say that the GRE is optional, I urge you to get in touch with them and ask them what optional means. Because I'm a little worried about programs that make the GRE optional. I'm a little worried that the only people who will be submitting their GRE scores are people who tend to do well. And I'm a little worried about a stigma being attached to the folks who apply and do not submit GRE scores. So if a program makes a GRE optional, I urge you to get in touch with them and ask them, what does optional mean? Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing is take a look at the fellowships that you're applying to and make sure that the fellowships don't require the general GRE. And if it's the case that the grad programs don't require the GRE and the fellowships you're applying to don't require the GRE, then hey, you're in good shape. Then you don't need to prepare for the GRE. So there's a question Anne-Marie asked, what's the earliest you can take a practice GRE as an undergrad? So if you're a sophomore and you know you are going to go to graduate school, and you've got the time to prepare and take the GRE, go ahead and do so because your GRE scores will remain valid for up to 5 years. So if you've got the time to take it early and prepare and do well, then why not do so, right? The other great thing about taking it early is that if something happens that you didn't expect and you end up getting scores that are disappointing, well, now you've got more time to study and take it and turn those scores around. So if you know you're going to go to grad school, then there is no good reason not to take it early. And last question before we go on is, when asking grad administrators and grad students about previous GRE scores, is a cold email okay? Yes, but here's the kind of email that I would send. I would say, hey, I've been thoroughly researching your grad program. I've reviewed the website, and I wonder if you could give me a sense of the kinds of GRE scores that you like to see in competitive applicants. Ask it like that. Okay. Okay, one more question before we have to go on. So, anonymous attendee has asked, you mentioned the GRE is weighted a great amount in applications. Is it weighted about the same amount as undergraduate GPA? I have a mediocre GPA, but I'm hoping the GRE can improve my overall application. So, see, every program and every graduate admissions committee is different in terms of the weight that they assign to the GRE versus other components of the graduate application. This should be part of your research process. Try to find out from each program, how do they use the GRE? And how do they weight other components of the graduate application process? The grad administrator can be really helpful in getting that question answered, but also talking to current students and seeing what they know about the way the process works. So uh, there is no generic answer. You really have to try to find out for each program, and it can even vary based on who's serving on the graduate admissions committee that year. Okay. Okay. Let us go on. So, what do I mean by mindful? I mean studying purposefully. And folks, if I have to zero in on one thing that I did that I'm convinced made a huge difference for me, it's that based on the psychology research I was reading, the second time I prepared for the GRE, I never sat down to study without writing down in my GRE journal one goal or a couple of goals that I was pursuing for that study session. So I kept a journal. And for every study session, I had a goal that I had written down, or two, that I was trying to achieve for that study session. And after the study session was over, I'd go back to the journal and write down how satisfied I was that I'd achieved my goal for that study session. And I'd periodically review that journal and review those goals and how satisfied I was and modify my study plan accordingly, right? I wrote it all down. Now, but I'm going to share a little paradox with you. So I always studied with a goal or a couple of goals in mind. But you know what I know? Achieving a certain level of performance for that session. For example, folks, so I just got a message that my internet was unstable, so I may have cut out for a bit. So I apologize for that. So, Sydney's is my transmission okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay,
You just
good.
cut out for a really short second at
Oh,
the
good. Okay,
beginning of talking.
good enough, good enough. Okay, so think about this. I never set a study goal that was like, oh, I want to achieve a 85% accuracy on these 15 GRE questions that I'm working. Now, that should uh, that should stand out as a paradox to you, because keep in mind, What was my ultimate goal? My ultimate goal was to get kick-ass GRE scores. So I want you to resolve the paradox for me. If my ultimate goal was to get really great GRE scores, then why would it make sense for me to, during study, never set goals that were organized around achieving a certain level of performance? So put your guesses in the chat. Resolve the paradox for me. So Sophie says, start with smaller goals. Well, that's part of it. So Anne-Marie says, actual GRE will not be the same as a prep. Well, that's one thing that's getting closer. So Hannah says, because your goals should be learning material and setting goals for scores doesn't emphasize learning. Hannah, ding, 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 ding. Okay, Hannah got the answer. So, okay, so your prize is in the mail, so look for it. So Hannah got the answer. So that psychology research that I was reading and using to change the way I studied for the GRE, it was focused on mindset. And one of the things that I realized in reviewing that research was that if I set goals that were organized around achieving a certain level of performance, well, first, if I was successful, I could spend so much time patting myself on the back that my attention was distracted away from learning the material, learning the problem solving strategy, learning the way the question was designed and the way the answer choices were designed, right? And if I failed to meet that performance, see, I have a really terrible, awful inner critic. And what I realized was that if I failed to meet that performance, I would spend a whole lot of time beating myself up and calling myself stupid. And again, my attention was directed away from learning as much as I could of the strategies I was trying to learn and better understanding the questions and answers and the way that they were designed. And so instead, I always made sure that my study goals were organized around learning, either learning the problem solving strategy I was trying to learn or better understanding the way the questions and the answers were designed. I think that this may be the most important thing that I did the second time I prepared for the GRE. I also implemented a rule for myself that was very consistent with this approach. And the rule I implemented for myself was that for every minute I spent problem solving, I was going to spend at least a minute analyzing my performance. And that meant that if I spent 15 minutes working on a set of problems, I was going to spend an additional 15 minutes at least analyzing my performance. So that meant for the questions I got right, were there any clues that I missed that would have helped me get to the right answer faster? And even though I got the question right, let me look at each and every one of the wrong answer choices and make sure I understand why they're wrong and see if I can get some insights into the types of wrong answers that I'm going to see for a given question type. And for the questions I got right, well, okay, what were the clues that I missed? And let me understand each of the answer choices, the right ones and the wrong ones. So I'm convinced that that practice helped me to focus on better understanding the way the questions and answers were put together. So I started to become an expert on GRE questions and the kinds of wrong answers that show up for a given type of question. And so see, with this approach, it was less about, oh, am I smart enough? And it was more about, hey, this is a game. Can I better understand the way GRE questions are put together? Because when I can, I'm going to zero in on the right answer faster and more accurately. I've given you some more examples of learning goals, and hopefully these will be a spur, will give you some ideas to help you generate additional learning goals that you can use while you're studying. So that's mindful, purposeful study. That's lesson 2. Here's lesson 3. Make good strategies yours. Replace your problem-solving strategies with strategies that work. And study the way the questions and the answers are designed. So the argument I'm making to you is that you'll get good at the GRE when you begin analyzing how test designers put questions and answers together. You don't get good by just blindly practicing questions. You get good when you analyze the questions and when you have a strategy that works. And here's the great thing, folks, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to invent out of whole cloth strategies that work on GRE questions. You can read a Kaplan book, a Princeton Review book, a Magoosh book, a Manhattan Prep book. By the way, there's huge overlap in their strategies, but what each of those companies have done is that they've spent years analyzing thousands of GRE questions. And so their strategies are tuned to the way the questions and the answers are designed. All you have to do is study those strategies and make them your own. Get comfortable, fast, and efficient using those strategies. And to focus on studying the questions and the answers. Focus on understanding the kinds of wrong answers that you are likely to see for a given question type. And there, old GRE questions are evidence. Because when you can study old GRE questions and study the way they're designed, study the way the answers are designed, you're going to get to understand how they work. And you're going to start to answer the questions faster and more accurately. I'm going to show you how this works. So here's a question type you're going to see on the GRE. So this is a text complete. You know what? In the interest of time, I'm going to zip past this question and we're going to tackle another question type. But let me point out something to you for this question. Take a look at this question. This is a text completion question. With a text completion question, you're going to have a sentence with 1, 2, or 3 blanks. This has got 2 blanks. And for each blank, notice that there are 3 answer choices. And to get credit for this question, you've got to pick the right answer out of the 3 for the first blank, and you've got to pick the right answer out of the 3 for the second blank. No partial credit. Right? By the way, if there are 3 blanks, there would be 3 columns of answer choices. And notice the circle around the answer choices. Notice that? That's the GRE letting you know that you've got to pick just one answer choice for each column of choices. Right? Now, here's the thing. If you were in my class, I tell you that the key strategy for tackling this question is to cover up the answer choices and tear apart and parse the sentence and pull all the clues that you can out of the sentence and figure out which blank you can come up with a prediction of what should go into that blank. And then you want to do that for the second blank. And so without looking at the answer choices, you're going to predict answers that fit the clues you've analyzed in the sentence. And once you do that, you're going to uncover the answer choices and look for matches to your prediction. And you can do that a lot faster than having to effortfully evaluate each of the answer choices. Now, we're a little short on time, so I'm going to zip past this sentence, this question type, and I'm going to show you a second question type, and we're going to do that second question type. Okay, so let me skip past it. So here's another question type, sentence equivalence. Here's a sentence, 1 blank. And all of these question types all these questions have 1 blank. And check out, notice that there are 6 answer choices, and notice the square around each of the answer choices. Now, listen to these instructions. For each of questions 15 through 19, select the 2 answer choices that when used to complete the sentence blank, comma, fit the meaning of the sentence as a whole. and produce completed sentences that are alike in meaning. So what those instructions tell you is that you've got to pick 2 answer choices out of the 6. And by the way, the square around the answer choices, that's the GRE telling you that you're in a multiple answer situation. And for each of the sentence equivalence questions, you've got to pick the 2 answer choices out of the 6. Now, let me ask you all a question. Why even look at the sentence? I want you to explain to me why it would be, why I shouldn't simply look at the answer choices and look for 2 answer choices that are synonyms of each other. Why would that be a really, really bad idea? Put it into the chat. Oh, so Hannah's got it. Yeah, 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 yeah. Sam's got it too. Yeah, and so does Natalie. Right. So this is the problem. There may be multiple pairs of answer choices that are synonyms of each other. How do you figure out which pair of answer choices is the right one? Well, it directs you back to analyzing the clues in the sentence. Here's the other thing. The 2 right answers may not quite be synonyms of each other, but what will be true is that when you plug each of them into the sentence, the overall meaning of the sentence will be the same. So what that tells you is that your attention shouldn't be on the answer choices. It should be on parsing that sentence and making sure you understand all the clues that are in that sentence. And when you do, you should be able to come up with a prediction for what goes into the blank. A prediction that is based on your analyzing the clues that are in that sentence. And once you have your prediction, then look at the answer choices and look for 2 matches to your prediction. Let me read the sentence. Then I'm going to ask you folks some questions that will help us tear apart this sentence and understand what it's about. Take a listen. In medieval philosophy, every physical phenomenon is presumed to have some determinate cause, comma, leaving no place for blank in the explanation of particular events. Okay, so first, what are the hardest words in that sentence? Put it in the chat. Yes, Juliet says it. Kirsten says it. Lauren says, so Angela says determinate. Kirsten, Juliet say determinate. Lauren says presume. Well, right. So do you have to know what presume means? Absolutely. Right. But determinate, right? But if you don't know what determinate means, is this a much harder question? Sure it is. So is vocabulary important? Absolutely. Vocabulary still matters, right? So, by the way, physical phenomenon. What is a physical phenomenon? Put it in the chat. Well, so Angela says, is ball dropping a physical? It sure is. Something in nature, but that's what Juliet says, but we need more than that. Lauren says a tangible experience. And Amit says something tangible. Yes, it's a specific physical event, right? A tangible event or occurrence. Sophie's got it right, a physical occurrence. So it's an event, a tangible event, right? A palpable event, right? So that's what it is. So keep that in mind, right? Now, what does determinate mean? And by the way, there is a interesting synonym for determinate that's right there in this sentence. A casual? No. But Sophie says a causal. Causal. Yes, yes. But we need more than that. We need more than that. It's what type of cause that we're looking for, Sophie. Specific, Darby's got it, specific and particular. Those are good synonyms for determinate. Folks, listen to the sentence with the paraphrase and see if we know a lot more. In medieval philosophy, every tangible occurrence is assumed to have some specific, particular cause. So, does that help understand the first part of the sentence before the comma? Sure, it does. Now, look with me at what follows the comma. And I'm going to ask you, what in part is the comma saying? The second part of the sentence is leaving no place for something in the explanation of what kind of events? What kind of events? Specific, particular, determinate events, right? So, talk to me. If the first part of the sentence is saying that in medieval philosophy, every tangible occurrence has a specific particular cause, then there's no place for what kinds of causes in medieval philosophy? Events that have, yes, Natalia's got it right. Leaving no place for events that don't have a specific cause. In other words, uncertain or ambiguous events. Now, so that's a prediction for that blank, uncertainty. So let me plug it in to our paraphrase of the sentence and see if you think we've got a good prediction with uncertainty. In medieval philosophy, every tangible event is presumed to have some specific cause, comma, leaving no place for uncertainty in the explanation of particular events. You tell me, folks, is uncertainty a great prediction for the blank? Yeah, and Darby says ambiguous, right? Yeah. Or by the way, your prediction could have been non-specificity, right? Leaving no place. By the way, so what does the comma connote in this sentence? Is the comma signaling a change in theme or a continuation along the same theme? Which one? Continuation, right? No, I meant not a shift, but a continuation along the same theme, right? Right? But the leaving no place is a really important part of that second part of the sentence because it's letting us know that, wait a minute, if in medieval philosophy, every physical event has a particular cause, then there is no room for events that have non-determinate causes, right? So uncertainty is a great prediction, right? Now, folks, dig this. Let's take a look at the answer choices and let's look for matches to our prediction of uncertainty. But before we do that, folks, if our prediction is uncertainty, what would be an attractive trap answer choice, an attractive wrong answer choice? If the right answer has to, connote ambiguity or uncertainty, hey, what's a good trap answer choice? Put it in the chat. Well, inaccuracy, it would, so, uh, uh, and well, no, Kayla, wait, Kayla, this is a Stanford. Hey, Kayla. I know Kayla from Stanford. Hey, how you doing? But ambiguity fits uncertainty, so that's a good prediction. So that's not a trap wrong answer. That's a right answer, right? So if ambiguity or uncertainty is a good trap answer, what if you saw a trap answer choice that related to certainty? Would certainty be right? No, because that's the opposite of what we're looking for. If the right answer is ambiguity or uncertainty, then an answer choice that said certainty is wrong. And that, folks, is an opposite wrong answer trap. It's an answer that's the opposite of what we're actually looking for. That makes sense? So the GRE with the harder sentence equivalence question loves to put in answer choices that actually are opposite to the meaning that you're actually looking for. And the naive test taker will be roped in by that answer choice. Okay. So uncertainty or ambiguity, those are our predictions. Take a look at the answer choices here, folks. A, happenstance. What's happenstance, y'all? What's another definition of happenstance? Yeah, coincidence. Yes, yes. It is a coincidence related to uncertainty? Sure. So is A, one of our answer choices, a match to our prediction of uncertainty or ambiguity? Sure it is. So keep A. B, chance. Is chance a match to our prediction? Yes, it is. So A and B are the right answer. But folks, let's take a look at the other answer choices. Look at C, error. By the way, is error ambiguity or uncertainty? No, it isn't. So we rule that out. Look at D, experience. So is experience uncertainty or ambiguity? No. So we can rule that out. E, context. Is context a match to uncertainty or ambiguity? No, so it's out. And look at F, miscalculation. By the way, give me 2 trap answer choices. Put the letters of 2 attractive trap answer choices in the chat. Yes, C and F. Yeah, error and miscalculation. So if you had made the mistake that I first started with, where you were looking for 2 words that are synonyms of each other, and you see error and miscalculation, so you choose those, wrong. You just got the question wrong. So folks, now let me just ask y'all, did it take a while for us to parse the sentence? Sure. But do you think if you practice parsing sentences and pulling the clues, understanding the grammatical cues, can you get good and fast at understanding what sentences are saying and coming up with predictions? Sure you can. You can get a lot faster. And when you do, and you come up with your own predictions, you can do what we just did, which is take a look at the answers, and now you're just scanning for matches to your prediction. That's what you should be doing studying, where you're breaking sentences into parts and analyzing the clues in those sentence parts, paraphrasing, then putting the sentences together, analyzing the clues, and coming up with your own prediction. And when you come up with your own prediction, even if you're a little bit off, it helps you zero in on the answer choices that are better matches. That's what study should be about. So I hope that was helpful. By the way, I had this math question just for this reason. So for social sciences graduate programs like sociology, psychology, political science, they tend to look at your verbal reasoning score, but also your quantitative reasoning score. And partly because statistics training is such a fundamental part of the first year of doctoral training. And folks, if it's been 3 or 4 years since you've taken a math course and you're having trouble remembering the definition of integer, right? Or, the properties of 30, 60, 90 right triangles, then part of what you've got to do in preparing for the GRE is to review all that math that you haven't seen in years, right? And so there's some resources I'm going to draw your attention to at the end of this workshop that will help you to renew your acquaintance with the math that you'll be tested on the general GRE. Okay, lesson 4, mindful test prep. Don't prepare for a bike race through Paris by riding your bike through Palo Alto. That would be a mistake because the terrain of Paris is quite different than the terrain in Palo Alto. Uh, and my point is this. So I've just been urging you to learn good problem solving strategies and to study the way GRE questions and answers are designed so that you know the kinds of wrong answers and you can be alert for those wrong answers. But you want to practice those strategies on actual GRE questions. You want to analyze actual GRE questions and answers, not Kaplan or Magoosh questions, because no test prep company does as good a job of making their questions as similar as practice questions as similar as possible to actual GRE questions. So I'm going to recommend to you 3 books that will constitute your bank of actual GRE questions to study. You'll practice Kaplan or Princeton Review or Magoosh strategies, but practice them on actual GRE questions. Okay. Lesson 5. And by the way, this amounts to a recommendation that I did not fully appreciate when I was studying for the GRE. And that is this: if you want to learn something, test yourself on it. Test yourself early and often. So when I teach the GRE, so I run summer research programs at Stanford and I teach the GRE. At the end of each of my lessons, I have my students pull out some paper and write down what they think are the most important insights from that lesson. And I urge you to, when you study, don't just at the end of your study period write down how satisfied you are that you achieved your goal for that study session. Also write down what you think are the most important insights from that study session. Calling on yourself to do that forces you to reflect more deeply on what you've been studying, and it helps you to process that material in a deeper fashion, right? If you're studying a strategy for tackling sentence equivalence questions, then periodically cover up the books and try to recall all the steps of that strategy. If you know that strategy and you're using those strategies, then you shouldn't have a problem recalling the steps to those strategies in order, right? Testing is learning. Trying to stump yourself. If you're trying to build your vocabulary and you're using vocabulary cards or you're using a vocabulary app, those moments when you try to stump yourself and you're struggling to remember the definitions of a word, that's where real learning is taking place, whether you recall correctly or not. The effort that you're putting in amounts to real substantive learning. And last but not least, and another very important lesson for mindful test prep. Folks, uh, I tried to think of preparing for the GRE as if I was an athlete preparing for a high stakes performance. And no coach today prepares their athletes, but only addresses the athlete's physical preparation for an event. They're also thinking about preparing their athletes psychologically. And for me, the core idea that I based my study plan on the second time was on the notion that the skills involved in doing well on the GRE can be developed. They can be improved with enough of the right kind of study. And so I relentlessly evaluated every element of my study plan to make sure it was consistent with a growth mindset, with the idea that I can improve my performance on each and every element of the GRE. And so, for example, that meant that I was never satisfied with simply saying, you know, I suck at reading comprehension. I was never satisfied with that. I called on myself to say, okay, what is it specifically about reading comprehension that I'm getting wrong? What specific type of reading comprehension question? And is it that I'm misunderstanding the passage? Is it that when I'm reading the passage and taking notes on the passage, I'm misunderstanding key elements of the passage? Or is it that there's certain reading comp questions that I'm not processing effectively? In other words, I tried to make my diagnosis of the problem as specific as I could, because the more specific the dialogue, not the dialogue, the more specific the diagnosis, the easier it is for you to turn things around. And I embraced my mistakes and errors, because my deal was this: if I can understand the mistakes and errors I make during study, then I can set things up so that I don't make those mistakes when I'm taking the actual exam. By the way, one of the things I did, I stopped calling GRE problems problems. I called them puzzles, because I was trying to promote a more playful approach to preparing for the GRE. Folks, for part of the time that I was preparing for the GRE, I had a full-time job at IBM, and I was taking a night class in psychology at UMass Boston. There were times when I would get home and the last freaking thing I want to do is to sit my ass down in a chair and study for the GRE. And so part of my psychological preparation was, how do I set things up so that I can stick with an aggressive plan of study, so that I don't start to dread sitting down to study. I would study 5 or 6 days a week, but I always had at least one day where I took a break and didn't think about study. And I would study 1 to 3 hours a day, but after 30, 35 minutes, I'd always take a 5 to 10 minute break, walk around, get a drink, stretch my legs, and then sit down and continue studying. Right? I kept a GRE journal in which I recorded everything I did to study. I'd write about the things that seemed to be going well and the things that were giving me trouble. And by the way, I did this something else that in retrospect was pretty weird. I started compiling a list of things that could happen to me on the day of the exam that would throw me off my game. And I remember two of them, like getting lost on the way to the testing center and arriving late, or being at the testing center and having someone in another cubicle making so much noise, hacking and coughing and sneezing, that I can't concentrate on the exam. And for each of those 16 or 17 things that I came up with a solution and I wrote it down. So I'm talking with psychology folks here. You know what I was doing. What I was doing was increasing my sense of perceived control over the testing situation. Because by coming up with solutions that I was confident I could implement, I was telling myself that I was ready for anything that could happen on the day of the exam. Also, I knew that anxiety, distraction were really big issues with me on standardized exams. So I came up with a technique for regaining my focus when I was tired, distracted, worried. And it was just closing my eyes and taking a few deep breaths to calm myself. I would practice this during my study sessions, during my practice exam sessions, so that by the time that I was sitting down to take the actual exam, I had practiced this technique hundreds of times. So that whereas early on, it might take me 5 minutes, 7 minutes to relax and regain my focus, by the time I was sitting down to take the actual exam, I could close my eyes, take one deep breath, and boom, I was focused and I could open my eyes and keep working on the exam. I think the point is that a certain amount of anxiety and worry are normal and are probably necessary for you to bring your best performance forward. But you want to be in control of that. You want to be able to dial back your anxiety and worry if they're too intense. So those are the 6 lessons. Now, let's talk about the materials you want to gather to prepare for the GRE. And you should get these 3 books. This first book comes with access to Power Prep, those 2 actual computer GREs. You can download that software for free when you register for the GRE or when you get this book. And this book has 2 paper GREs, a decent, not great math review, and plenty of help on the analytical writing section. These 2 additional, also that first book has a bunch of practice GRE questions designed by the same people that design GRE questions. These 2 additional books, that first book has 150 actual verbal reasoning GRE items. The third book has 150 actual GRE quantitative reasoning items. So these 3 books constitute your bank of actual GRE questions and answers to study. These are the questions you study to become an expert on GRE questions and answers and the way that they're designed. Okay. Now, to learn good GRE problem-solving strategies and to understand how these questions and answers are designed, you want to think about the next set of books. Now, I'm a former Kaplan instructor, so I teach out of the Kaplan book, that first book, but hey, listen, I'm agnostic. The Princeton Review GRE book is great. And I actually pull material from the Manhattan Prep GRE books. These are great books. And by the way, the math review and the math practice questions in that Manhattan Prep math strategies book are great. If you can work the math questions in that book, you're ready for just about anything the general GRE will throw at you. Also, the Magoosh GRE book is a really great book. And by the way, Magoosh has a GRE blog where they review GRE test prep books. And I've gotten a lot of great information from that blog. So I urge you to check that out. And last but not least, if you want to build your vocabulary, if your verbal score is lower than you'd like and you think it's due to your vocabulary, that book, GRE Vocab Capacity, the 2017 edition, is a really great book for building your vocabulary. But Magoosh has a GRE vocabulary app that is really great, and I highly recommend it. And one great thing about that app is that, the words that you'll be learning are words that tend to show up over and over on the GRE. And so that's one good thing about that app. But in addition, if you're presented with a word and you know that word really well, and so you don't want to be quizzed on it so frequently, you can let the app know that it should show you that word less frequently. But if there's a word that you know you're having trouble with and you want to be quizzed on that word more frequently, you can tell the app that and it'll quiz you on that word more frequently. So I really like that. I really like that app from Magoosh. So folks, these are among the books. And by the way, you don't have to get all of these books. I would get maybe the Kaplan or Princeton Review book, and then maybe Magoosh or Manhattan Prep. Okay. And by the way, take down my email address, jlbrown@stanford.edu, and feel free to email me, and I'd be happy to help you in any way that I can. Now, let me, by the way, this talk is grounded in some really great psychology research. So since I'm talking with a bunch of psychology students, these are some books that I highly recommend if you want a deeper dive into the psychology of learning and the psychology of performance. So I highly recommend them, especially Mindset by Carol Dweck. And I'll tell you that Carol Dweck's research was the research that convinced me to go to graduate school in social psychology, and that I used to change the way that I studied for the GRE. So that work has a soft spot, as a cherished part in my heart. And I've told Professor Dweck that too. So with that, I'm going to leave this. Here's the link to download these slides, plus a link to the appendix. And you can download the GRE percentile tables at that second link. And let me stop here. And we've got a little bit of time for questions. So why don't we take a look at those? So feel free to use the Q&A or the chat to uh, uh, present any questions that you'd like us to tackle. So, so Angela asks, "What's the Magoosh app?" It's called GRE Vocabulary, I believe. So search in the Android or Apple store, and it's there. But I think it's just called GRE Vocabulary. By the way, there's another app that's also good that has the same name, GRE Vocabulary, and it's by the company Brainscape. That GRE Vocabulary app is also great. Also, Kayla asks, "How do you have any suggestions for how to prepare for the psychology subject test?" Oh, so the GRE subject test for psychology is an easy test to prepare for because unlike other subject tests, a good intro psych textbook like James Gross's is all you need, plus a couple of old psych subject tests. You can download one old psych subject test directly from GRE. And if you uh, take that, research answers to the questions that you missed, and study a good Psych 1 textbook, that can help you prepare for the psych. By the way, I wasn't a psych major. I majored in physics and I double minored in math and psychology. And years later, when I was preparing for the psychology subject test, I got a good Psych 1 textbook and I got a good book that was an outline of introductory psychology. And I studied that outline textbook. Then I studied a good Psych 1 textbook. And that helped me get, I think, a 92nd percentile score on the psychology subject test, even though I didn't major in psychology. So I think that's a good approach. Find one or two old psych subject tests, but study a good intro psych textbook. So yeah. So Sophie asks in the Q&A, "Do you need to report all of your GRE scores to schools that require the GRE for admission?" No. So Score Select if you've taken the GRE multiple times, and don't do that if you don't have to, using Score Select, you can pick which set of scores you want sent to which school. So there's a fee associated with it, but that's so you can pick which set of scores will be sent to which schools. So other questions. Young asks, "How long would I advise to plan to prepare?" So both times I studied for the GRE, I took 8 to 9 weeks. So it depends on how far your diagnostic scores are from the scores you're aiming for. And you need to think about your own experience with standardized exams. So if preparing for standardized exams is challenging for you, you'll want to budget more time. Maybe you want to think about 10 to 12 weeks. I think it's probably unrealistic to think about longer than that. Although if you want to build your vocabulary, you may want to think about building your vocabulary over 3 months, not just, 10 weeks, right? But I think, 6 to 12 weeks is a reasonable amount of time. And for me, even though my diagnostic scores were far below where I needed them to be, 8 or 9 weeks, 5 to 6 days a week, hour to 3 hours a day with lots of breaks worked really well for me. You need to think about your own experience in terms of making that decision for yourself. Okay. So Juliet asks, "Do you have any tips for other elements of the graduate applications process, such as essays?" So boy, I have a whole workshop that I do on graduate admissions essays, but rather than give you all of that in the interest of time, there's a book written by a friend of mine that I would recommend. It's called Graduate Admissions Essays, and it's by Don Asher. And we become friends because we'd be presenting at the same grad diversity recruitment events and conferences. And so Don Asher, Graduate Admissions Essays, the 4th edition. It's a great book. he has examples of graduate admissions essays, and he takes you through how to craft strong essays, but he also gives great advice on the rest of the graduate application process. So it's a really good, a good book. So I highly recommend it. And Sydney puts in the chat that next week, you'll be able to hear from Stanford Psych graduate students talking about their process for crafting effective personal statements. So be sure to tune in for that. And again, I highly recommend that book too, because it'll give you a lot of great examples of what to do and what not to do. And Don, so the other thing that Asher does is he interviews lots of faculty and graduate admissions officers. So he has a really good understanding of what faculty want in a personal statement. So hope that helps. Jordan has a question. Oh, how much time did you spend studying for the writing portion of the GRE? So when I took the GRE, it was an analytical reasoning section, not a writing portion. So so it depends. So it really depends on how comfortable you are with the task of this kind of writing. Here's something else that I'm going to say. So understanding the nature of an argument, the structure of an argument, is actually really important for doing well on these essays. An argument is going to have a conclusion and then evidence that is being presented to support the conclusion. But there's a third key element of the arguments that you're going to read and the arguments you're going to craft for yourself in the analytical reasoning section, and that's the assumptions. That is the hidden elements of arguments. So here's something I highly recommend. That first ETS book has a bunch of GRE questions and then examples of essays with different scores. And it's a really great exercise to take one of those essay questions, write your own essay, and then compare it to the scored essays in the book. Doing that will help you understand what are the elements that are always in high scoring essay, 5 or 6 scored essays? And what are the elements that are missing in poorly scored essays, essays that just get a 2 or a 2.5? If you do that, that will start to clue you in to what needs to be a part of an essay that is likely to get a higher score. And the other thing that you'll observe is that the 5 and 6 essays are always substantially longer than the 1, 2, and 3 score essays. So that's what I would urge you to do. By the way, if you have any concerns about being able to write clearly and grammatically, the Kaplan GRE book has a really great chapter on the elements of clear and concise writing. So I direct you to that resource too. So. Any other questions? Well, okay, folks. So that's all that I have. So I hope this was helpful. And do take down my email address and these links. And good luck to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks so much for doing this, Joseph, and taking your time to
You're
do this.
welcome. My pleasure.
And also, we'll be sending out an email shortly to get people's email addresses if you're interested in receiving emails
Oh,
from
yes.
Joseph
Yes.
about Stanford's graduate deadlines, other like summer research programs. So make sure to read that email. And also
Yeah,
make sure
please do. Just a little bit more on that. So
Mhm.
uh, what I'll be doing is contacting you with information about our programs, grad fee waivers, but also if you're not applying this cycle, then information about our summer research programs so that you could consider coming to Stanford next summer and doing research with our faculty and grad students. So do look for that email, and you can opt in, and you'll hear from me if you're applying this cycle in late September. And if you're not and you want to think about summer research, you'll hear from me in November.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. Make sure to join us next week for our graduate student panel. Thank you all for coming. All right.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
All right, great.